So while we've done some data visualizations and basic question answering settings, I want to show you again, review some of the ways to create data visualizations in Power BI that align with a question. But here we want to emphasize the relationship type in the data that we want to highlight. And so let's just start with this question right here. We've got some data already loaded into Power BI, and this comes from the Pueblo hospitality data. And here we've combined everything. And so we've got a bunch of different columns, and you'll just have to study the data dictionary to understand them all. But the first question is, does the number of rentals affect how many hours housekeeping works? So if we come over here to our list um, of fields, we have room rentals. And if we take a look at that, there's that summation sign, and that indicates that it's a numeric. And so that would be like a continuous variable. And then if we come up here, we have hours worked housekeeping. That's also numeric. So we have two continuous variables. And we have two continuous variables. A scatter plot is an ideal way to look at a relationship between them because we want to see if the number of rentals affects or correlates with how many hours housekeeping works. So we'll stick in a scatter plot, bring it up to the top here and expand it. And then we're just going to click on room rentals. That'll place it in the x-axis. And we'll click on hours worked housekeeping. And you'll notice, again, by default, it aggregates them and it sums them. We can pull down and select don't summarize and do that for both of those measures. And then we'll see that there's a bunch of marks, and every mark here represents a new row of data, in which case it's going to be, I think, a property month, if I remember right. You have to take a look at it. Now, it'd be helpful to indicate a trend line here, and we can add a trend line by going over here to our visualizations palette and clicking on our analysis. Now, see we've got our analytics pane, and we'll just turn the trend line on. And we're just going to go ahead and make it a little gray, make it a solid line. So maybe make it a little lighter gray so it fades into the background, but you can still see it. So there we have a good visualization that captures the relationship between two continuous variables. Anytime you're talking about correlation between two continuous variables, a scatter plot is probably the go-to way to visualize that correlation. Now let's go ahead and click on the next question. Is there a correlation between room rentals and profit? And again, you should be thinking correlation, room rentals, what does that sound like? We just saw that, that's a continuous variable. And profit is definitely a continuous variable, so we'll add a scatter chart. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to click on room rentals. We're going to click on profit. And then each of these transactions we'd want to be broken out. So every rental will don't summarize. That allows us to see that as room rentals go up, meaning the number of times a property was rented, generally the profit goes up. So let's go ahead and add a trend line. We'll make this trend line dotted, change the color, and we could change the transparency, but depending how much we want it to fade in the background. And then let's just notice these points here. There's a lot of overlap, and so it's hard to tell just how thick those are. We can go modify under the format visual. We can go to markers. We could change fill only to border only, and then it leaves them hollow, and then it's a little easier to see the density in the more dense spots. But then again, there again, we see that the thing to focus on is there a correlation between room rentals and profit? They're both continuous variables, so we chose a scatter plot. If we go back to our first question, does the number of rentals affect how many hours housekeeping works? When we understand our data and we know that number of rentals is continuous and number of hours in housekeeping is continuous, we'd choose a scatter plot. Now let's go change it up a little bit. If we ask this question, does renovation type influence a property's average monthly profit? So since we have average in there, we know that we're going to be aggregating rows into something. Otherwise, the average of one number is just that number. And then we should be asking renovation type. Where would we find that? And if we go and look at renovation type, and see there's not a summation sign next to it. And so we're going to assume it's categorical. So let's just start with a clustered column chart. And let's see if we can't prove that out. So if we go click on renovation type, it sticks it on the x-axis. Then if we go to profit, it sticks it in the y-axis. We'll change it to average. And you'll see that renovation type, there's 4 basic types, and we could look at the data dictionary to understand them. But assuming that a full renovation, we're guessing, means that they've renovated the whole place, then if something's fully newly renovated, then it tends to rent for more and they get more profit. So they overcome the costs and make more profit. So we could change this. We can go change our marker type. Let's see, where are we? Grid lines, columns, right there. It's under columns this time. Let's just change our column color a little bit. We could then go in and turn grid lines off, clean it up a little. And you can see it's pretty easy to declutter that visualization. Remember, that's something that's important on your projects. Always take away things that really have no relevance to the question asked. Now, lastly, let's look at a different flavor of a question. We're talking about geographical regions. So if we ask what geographical regions, think city level, if we're talking about cities where these are rented, have the highest monthly profits. And then if there's more than one property in a city, indicate that with the size of the mark. And so if we look around, we can see we've got a couple map options. We can use this field map. Let's stick that up there. And you kind of have to play around with this. If we go look at city, and we add city to location, you can see it doesn't do much. We can zoom in. It does a pretty good job of guessing the cities here. Let's see what happens if we add in state. I'm going to stick state up above. When we do state, it then tends to fill it. So we're just going to play around with it here. What we'd like is the size of the mark to indicate the number of properties in that city. And so we'd have to search around here. Let's take a look at map settings, control style, general, properties. The trick is finding it. We can start with fill color. Let's say we wanted our fill color to be according to the monthly profits. And so let's go back to that. Let's change fill color. We can click on this f of x, this function, and we're just going to change the gradient of these. So we're going to say we want this to represent, the gradient to represent profit. And we'll take average profit. And then anything that's empty, we'll just say don't format. And then just so it stands out a little better, we're going to change this lowest value to white. So you can see it's filling our states, but we really would like to focus on the cities. So let's see what we can do here. We change these around and zoom back in. Notice when we stick the cities first, we start to see the cities get highlighted, but it's still pretty vague here. Let's see if we change the map style. So we're going to use this map instead of the field map. And now we've got our cities there, and we could focus, there's a couple over here in Virginia. We'll just focus on the bulk of them here. Maybe make this a little bigger. But you can see that our shade corresponds to the profit. So we can see the darker ones are the higher profit. So if we hover over that, that's Lawton. Let's see if we can't change this. Notice when we did this other map, we now have a bubble size. And so we could actually count the bubble, the property ID. Now let's go back. We'll zoom back in. You can see that we can see bubbles that are larger tend to have more properties in them. And then we have darker bubbles where the profit tends to be higher. And so we're getting closer. This is more manageable, more insightful. It'd be nice if we could see, we got Oklahoma City and we got count. Let's see if we could take profit and add that to, oops, come back. We want property size in there too. Oh, I know what we wanted. We'll undo that. We'll keep property ID, but we're going to take profit and add it to tooltips. Then we'll average profit. So now when we hover over it, we can actually see the profit, and we can see that it gives us the city. If we wanted the state to show up there too, we'd have to take state and drag that to profit as well. So now when we hover, we can see we got the city, state, we have the average profit and the count of property ID. And one thing we may want to do is make sure that we're counting distinct, because now when we hover over that, we have 1 versus 6. Because if we take a look at our data, we'll see that our property IDs will be duplicated. That's because we're renting each property multiple times, or possibly multiple times. And so there you see how we use a map. That's a good example for a map. And the reason why is because we have a categorical variable. But if we were to break this out and use a city, we're going to use a clustered chart. Let's see. We use a clustered chart. We drag city to x-axis. And we drag average profit to y. We just start getting a whole lot of cities. And we could drag state up to the x-axis too and group things within. Let's try that again. Oh, it's only going to let us have 1. And so it's really hard to nest state. We could drag state to legend. But see, that gets to be too busy. It's not a good, even when we just have city, we have too many cities to really see it all on one page. And so that's why this would be an appropriate option for like a graph or a map, because then we can see them all, but we still get to see the number of properties by the size and the average profit in that city. So we can see up here in Denver, we have some higher profit, but there's also in Wheat Ridge that tends to be a lower average profit. Anyway, that's just one way that we could answer this question. There are others, but it's probably more appropriate to use a map here than a column chart. So hopefully that's helpful.